Everybody, 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 drop your buffs. Your buddy, drop your buff.
Zeke Smith first cemented his status as a Survivor fan favorite in Millennials vs. Gen X. Zeke emerged as a charismatic and strategic player early in the game. After a tribe swap, he managed to survive by forming a cross-generational alliance. At the merge, Zeke found himself in a majority alliance and even survived a dreaded rock draw. But at the next tribal council, Zeke's ally Will flipped on him and Zeke was sent to the jury. Zeke immediately returned to the next season, Game Changers, where he once again survived through the merge by playing even more aggressively and enduring one of the most infamous tribal councils in Survivor history, which we will get into later. On day 33, Zeke's allies Andrea, Michaela, and Sarah flipped on him and sent him to the jury. At the final tribal council, Zeke advocated for Sarah Lacina, who was crowned the sole survivor. Zeke went on to represent Survivor at the GLAAD Awards and appeared in the 2020 Netflix documentary Disclosure: Trans Lives on Screen. Zeke has somewhat backed away from the Survivor fan community in the years following Game Changers, and as such, I am so honored to have him here today. Welcome to Drop Your Buffs, Zeke.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thank you for, I know this has been a multi-year, I think it's almost been like 8 years of you sending me DMs asking me to do stuff, and I've always been like, eh. But finally, I'm submitting. I'm submitting to your power, Evan.
Thank you so much, and on Pride Month, no less, so this feels quite appropriate.
Yeah, well, this is the month that I do media.
Fair. Well, I'm very happy to have you here. Now, Zeke, as I mentioned, you are not overzealous when it comes to wanting to participate in Survivor conversations, and I can imagine that's for a myriad of reasons. What ultimately convinced you after this 8-year journey to say yes to drop your buffs?
Well, I think you have to understand, I was a big Survivor fan before I did it, and like not only listened, but like contributed things to Rob Has a Podcast and felt very connected to the Survivor fan community. There's a big fan community in New York, and I would go to, we'd go to bars and watch the show together. We would play like day-long games of Survivor in the park, which I played with Andrea before I went on Game Changers. And then like I read a lot of the things that the fans said about me online, and I was like, I don't like the fan community anymore because of like how I feel like I'm not being treated as like treated well. That kind of ruined the fan part of it to me. And my Survivor experience was very complicated. We understand that. And but through all of like my time on Survivor and like watching it air and preparing for the outing, and like I had a very close relationship with Probst and Van Wagenen and everybody behind the scenes. I've had him over to my house, made him fried chicken. We talked, whatever. We talk and we text, not talked. Though maybe new word.
Yeah.
And then, I was held so close and felt so loved, but like really there was a lot of like trauma going on for a lot of things about my Survivor experience. And I really wasn't able to process that until I stepped away from the show and my relationship from the show, which was necessary for me to grow. Something I've discovered about post-traumatic stress is that if you're not dealing with it, when things happen to other people, you feel guilty and responsible. And that's what happened when, Kelly Kim was going through, her troubling time on the show, because I went to college with Kelly. She emailed me before she went to casting. I told her, don't do it, that you're about to graduate from Harvard Business School. You don't need to do this. There are only negative outcomes which can come from it. Like imagine if something happened to you like it happened to me. She didn't listen, but she called me right when she got back and said, I should have listened to you. Something happened. And I got to I tried to mentor her through the situation, but she wasn't getting the love and embrace and the help and the support that I got. And I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like I was responsible for it. And if I had handled my stuff differently, if I had been more critical of the show, it wouldn't have happened to Kelly. And I kind of like spiraled out. But now I realize it's a symptom of post-traumatic stress. So, which I have now dealt with. But a lot of that meant that I needed to fully step away from the show and not like feel so special when Probst texts me to go to dinner or something, you
Mm,
know?
yeah.
So, uh, yeah, that's why I'm not really super involved in the show. I mean, also like now that I have been openly critical of the show, they don't like me anymore. So there's that part of it too.
Which we'll get to later. But let's rewind to prior to your Survivor experience, because as you said, you were a big fan of the show. Obviously, you came on in season 33, which I wouldn't call it a reset necessarily, but immediately following Second Chances, and then what was 32 if you I love
Hurrah.
how quizzing you. Okay, great. So you have this great run, you know what I mean? Between we're big fans of Samuel and Dosur here. Season 30 happened, but season 31 and 32 were some great seasons of television. The show was at a little bit of a transition point, as we kind of say quite a number of times in the 20s and 30s. But then they create what I think is one of the better themes that they did in the latter half of the show's time. But before all of that, what first got you into this show? And then separate from that, what brought you into the fan community? Because I feel like that's a very different level of fandom.
Sure. Um, well, I mean, I remember it being on television 25 years ago right now. Because it was the thing. I remember watching Richard Hatch win. I remember watching the premiere of Australia after the Super Bowl, and then whatever. I was there when it was like hot, and then fizzled away like most people. And then so I transitioned in college, and that was a clusterfuck for many reasons. And so I had to take time away from school. And I was like living in Connecticut alone with my mom, and was going to do that for a while. And then I was going to live in New York City with my brother afterwards. My brother and I don't really get along. So I asked my brother, like, what's something I can watch so we have something to talk about so we don't have to fight? And he said, well, I'm really into Survivor. Of course, that show's still on. And he sort of pitched me on it. And so I was like, all right, well, there are all these Survivor seasons that gives me something to watch while I recover from top surgery. And I remember I turned on Cook Islands, and immediately I was just like so hooked. Uh, and so I didn't really keep in touch with people and college. I was just like me, my mom, and my dog, and sometimes my brother, and I just watched Survivor. And my time in college had been so challenging, and I felt very disappointed in myself how I measured up to these challenges. And I wanted to be someone like the Survivor players who, when put in their darkest situation, measured up and showed up to the occasion and was mentally and physically strong. Um, so yeah, so I think I fell into the fan community because I watched it was Cook Islands through Heroes versus Villains, which is just was what was available streaming at the time. You had to buy it on iTunes. And after that, I was still like vibrating with Survivor stuff. So that's when I found Rob Has a Podcast, which had just started for Heroes versus Villains. And that kind of became like a little community for me to be involved in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Was your effort to become closer to your brother vis-a-vis the show ultimately successful?
No.
Fair enough, but you found Survivor, so you got something out of it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I got something to sort of like aspire to. I got like, really into like being in the outdoors and hiking and learning how to make fire and like thinking about mental toughness
Yeah.
and all of that jazz. So and so the reason I think we're probably segueing into this, so I'm just gonna hop ahead of you. Um, the reason I decided to apply is that I graduated from college. I moved to New York. No one knew I was trans. I was just Zeke the gay guy, and it was so much fun and wonderful. But I realized like in order to achieve the big dreams that I'd always had for myself, I had to overcome this thing of like worrying about if people knew that I was trans, because as long as I was worried about that, I wasn't going to do anything great. I was holding myself back. So I asked myself the question. I was like, if you weren't worried about people knowing you were trans, what's the one thing would do? And immediately it was, I would go on Survivor. So just sort of as an exercise in conquering fear, really, I made a video, I sent it in, they called me 2 hours later, and like literally before I knew it, I was in Fiji.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, but dialing back a bit, I would be curious about your thoughts on the LGBT representation on the show prior to your time there. I think it's often looked at as rather problematic, the tokenization, and I should say here really LGB prior to you coming on the show. And also today, obviously, we have quite a swath of players that identify, within the acronym. But at that time, again, kind of looked at as or looked back at as not being so great. However, when I watched the show in 2020, I kind of love a lot of those early depictions of LGBT people on the show. I look at someone like Richard Hatch. I'm not saying he's a heroic figure by any measure, but he's a fully fleshed out rendering of a gay man. Not every gay man, but a specific gay man. And I think the show did a really great job at showing that there are alternative ways that people within this community exist rather than being the monolith that I think greater culture was trying to form. Wondering your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, Richard Hatch is just such a real person because he can be bad, like he's not like a good gay, but he can also like be respected because at the end of the day he's the one who invented the strategic game of Survivor. And it was just such a big deal that the weird naked gay guy won. It like said such a nice thing about American culture, which is if we're all sort of on a level playing field and we all have to pull our weight, ultimately it doesn't matter who you are. I think later seasons of Survivor wouldn't have such a positive kind of view of American society. I think that first season was really unique because nobody knew what they were doing. We're just going on television and trying not to look like asses. Um, but he didn't have the typical like gay guy body, and he didn't have the typical gay guy affection. He got to be a fully well-rounded, real person on television. And I'm now on the board of directors of GLAAD. And one thing we talk about when we go and talk to networks and studios and writers' rooms about creating authentic trans representation, we often point to reality television as being better at giving America trans characters because trans characters aren't processed through another person's lens on reality
Mm.
television. We just get to be ourselves. Um, and it doesn't give you this sort of I know I just said doesn't give you this sort of caricature. It doesn't give you this sort of like straw person. It gives you a fully complex person who is good some days and bad some days and stupid some days and smart some days.
Right. Did you have a favorite LGBTQ plus I was gonna say character, but they're real
Yeah.
people. A person prior to your time on the show that you either really loved or just were really entertained by?
Um, you got to give it up for Rafe Judkins,
You
uh,
gotta.
who has gone on to such wonderful things outside of Survivor. But sort of being the like gay Survivor nerd, he was the first time I kind of saw someone like myself on the show. Yeah. And I think here's the tricky thing too, is like the first season, it is this outlier for so many reasons, but I think in part too for casting, because the show didn't know what it was casting for. And I think as Survivor moves through the 10s and 20s, it becomes more self-conscious of itself as a reality television show. And
Right.
we are looking to cast people who we think or who we know are going to be successful reality show contestants and less successful Survivor contestants, which is what I think we start to see moving into the 30s and 40s is casting people who are going to be good for Survivor and not just good for TV.
Going into your time leading up to arriving on the island, how much thought were you given to how much you wanted your transness to center your story, especially in knowing the groundbreaking nature of your casting, but also knowing that, as you said, reality TV is this unique place in which trans people get to ultimately dictate their narrative. However, what maybe didn't occur to you at the time was the editing process, which is its own sort of I don't know, can kind of dictate the authenticity in its own way. I don't know, but I
Yeah,
haven't been
well, I
on
mean,
TV.
yeah, I think I was very much attuned to the editing process because I wanted to go in. So I made my initial video, I did some initial interviews with them, and then it was later I told them that I was trans because I wanted them to be interested in me regardless of being trans. Because what that would set me up to do on the island is have stories and be entertaining, like have something to give other than being trans, which was always my goal. I think that was a big reason why I felt it was necessary to like play aggressively and be like kind of extra in interviews. Is like there is so much more I can contribute to the interestingness of the show that doesn't need to be me being trans.
And you did, by the way.
Well, I thank you. I tried very hard. I mean, I'd also been doing like improv for 4 years. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea of like sitting and trying to narrate something in an entertaining way was very much kind of what I was doing at the time. Um, but yeah, and that was always my feeling was like, I need to be very clear with them in all of these casting conversations, which I was. And then I also needed to feel like if they were trying to push me talking about being trans, the producers, then I need to be fully willing to be like, if you keep pushing, and there was like maybe a time or two where I'd say, you keep pushing me to talk about being trans, I'm going to quit. I'm not going to give you an interview why I quit, but I am going to go back and I'm going to give very many interviews to the press about you acting shady after you agreed not to act shady. Um, and I think most people who do Survivor don't feel empowered in that way to like tell them like I'm gonna fucking quit if you don't back off. Uh, but I felt very confident, and I also felt confident that um, they were scared by that idea. And for me, I always figured if another player was going to bring it up, it's because they recognize my chest scars, and that if it's I think now people have so much more of an understanding of what chest scars are, but at the time they didn't. Like trans guys just didn't exist in the media. And I felt that if someone knew what the chest scars were, they probably were someone who had had an affinity for trans people, right? Or were allies or knew a trans person in their life and were not whatever the person is who did the thing to me. So I know, and I think part of it too was this was so much an exercise in facing fears and just saying yes to life and going after it that, and I think this is true for anyone who does Survivor, all of like the anxious chatter you got to just push away and you got to just go and do it. And what is it they say now? I watched like one season of Survivor recently and Jeff kept saying, oh, full tilt boogie.
Yeah, that is an expression the hosts use. Yeah, quite a bit. Yes, they really do emphasize the full tilt bookie of it all. Well, you talk about sort of silencing that voice. When you first arrived out there, how successful was that for you? Did you find that you were able to fully immerse yourself in the game, or were those sort of fears about how people were perceiving you, was that overtaking your mind, or you were able to push it back?
Not at all. Like Survivor was such a liberating experience. It was
Mm.
so much fun because I was out there doing the thing that I most wanted to do at the time. And my whole mindset was just have so much fun. Just go after it. And honestly, I don't know about you, but I did not have great experiences in high school and was definitely not a popular kid. And I get out there and it's fucking millennials versus Gen X. I don't get along with people my own age. I'm also like the oldest guy out there by a few years at that time. Um, and that was more what was pressing on me. It's like, oh my God, I'm back in high school. And back in high school in Oklahoma, where all the cool kids are gathering around in a circle and holding hands and praying before challenges. That was more the trauma that came back to me. Of like, how am I going to break into this group of pretty people? Because these are not my people. They're also not very interested in talking to me. My only friend was Hannah, who also happened to like be doing improv at the Upright Citizens Brigade at the time. And even she turned on me in our first vote. But that was a very unique situation. I still hang with Hannah. I hold no beef about it. But that was more my consideration. My concern was how am I going to fit in with the popular kids? But I went out there and I made that fire and like led the
You sure
building of the
did.
shelter. And I was so elated by doing what I wanted to accomplish, which was rising up to meet the moment, which I hadn't done before. And Survivor inspired me to want to do and to take another leap and try to do it. And there I was doing it. So, I was also having my own life revelations out there.
Right. You talk about this idea of like the popular kids, and I think that's a pervasive theme throughout so many seasons of Survivor, but especially in that area of like the 30s, when they really started to prioritize the casting of like these quote unquote beautiful people. And when you watch the show today, as I believe you have watched some New Era Survivor.
Yeah, sure. I was watching the traders, and then I was like, and I met Yam Yam at a GLAAD event. So I went back and I watched their season, and then I like briefly gone through the most recent, not the most recent season, but the season Teeny was on.
Fair. So the show today, just there's not that same effort in casting. I'm not saying that the people that are cast on the show today are no longer beautiful, but that sort of textbook beauty, the sort of like magazine beauty that was present during that time, that's not the same anymore. As such, like those popular cliques don't seem to exist so much on the show today. Is it odd for you watching the show now and seeing the overall changes in approach around how the show is cast?
It is interesting, but I do feel, and I didn't watch much of the 30s outside of my. I haven't even finished both of my seasons, frankly. Once I was voted off, I was like, I don't need to watch this. Um, I I feel like Survivor came to embrace the nerd and like embrace the smart, sort of strategic person as being better for where the show was going over people who look good in bikinis.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that for me, the peak of the pretty people was really those 20s seasons where they were just cast because they were walking around Santa Monica and someone thought they looked good. And I feel like that turn started to I don't know. Again, I haven't really watched some late 30s, so I don't really know. But I do feel like if we start the kind of, I don't know, the third, if we're currently in the fourth era of Survivor, I feel like the third era started with Cagayan. And the people who came out of Cagayan who are most interesting, you got your Spencers, you got your Casses, you got your Tonys, who are none of those are your model types.
Hmm.
They are all like people who have strong opinions and have watched Survivor before. And I feel like that became what the show wanted was people with strong opinions who have seen Survivor before.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting. And again, it's like it's not as though they don't cast the pretty people anymore. There still are beautiful people on the show, but I think that emphasis made it such where I know as a viewer, you really had this investment in the underdog and in wanting to see them succeed. And I feel like in the show, moving more towards uplifting that nerd archetype, as you pointed out, it makes it such, and we talk about this a lot in the podcast, how there really aren't villains anymore on the show. And not only do you not get villains, but as a result of not having villains, the heroes don't hit the same because they're not coming up against the same struggles that they did when they had to fight against the villains. And I think part of what made your arc on Millennials versus Gen X so satisfying in that early chunk of the season was watching your ability to persevere and watching those people fall in love with you, which I think by proxy happened to the audience. We too fell in love with you in seeing them come to learn all the things that you had to offer and contribute, not only to the tribe, but them actually loving you as a human being.
Yeah, I in that Co Wrong, which was the season ahead of us, had so many villains, uh, and had just such nastiness to it. Even someone like Ty, who people love, like poured water on the fire, which is such a sin when you're out there, like dousing the fire. I also think that people who play villainously, who are willing to go out there and just like be dicks in front of a camera, they're dicks off the camera too. And the show, as it gets older, doesn't want to deal with difficult people. They want people who are going to be compliant, happy, yes, people on the island and off. Um, and I think too, there is a bit of a backlash amongst reality television viewers of watching people be dicks. Like it's not as much fun anymore. Cause I think there, at least for me, it's not as much fun anymore. But I feel like on the whole, people don't like watching. There are like the villains who are annoying and who just like to poke, and then there are the villains who are mean. And I feel like the mean villain is no longer sort of a desired character on the
Mm.
show. But I could be wrong.
Fair, I mean, but I appreciate your perspective on that. Can you differentiate then can you use by example an idea of like a good villain versus a bad villain on Survivor? And we're saying good versus bad in terms of like entertainment value.
Right. So like a, a good villain is Parvati, right? If we want to like look at like those people on the villains tribe, um, Parvati is fun to watch because she is scheming and lying and backstabbing people, but she's not getting up in people's faces and calling them like racial slurs or being misogynistic. Whereas if you look at a Russell Hantz, he is doing that. He is going out and trying to be objectively mean to people and not just playing a game that's going to hurt people's feelings.
Hmm. What do you make then of the fact that, and again, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with you here, just, food for thought, but
I
it's
don't
like,
know. We're talking a lot more.
what?
Oh no, no. I feel sometimes in this conversation I have felt a little underwhelmed, or not underwhelmed, a little undereducated, just because I haven't watched the show with a critical eye in a very long
Was
time.
underwhelmed a Freudian slip?
You never underwhelm, never
I
once.
might. Without Sean, I'm a little off, off my rocker here. But well, no, but I hear what you're saying. But first of all, I envy you for not having, had to endure so much of the new era. But what your knowledge of the show, let's say even until your last go of it, 33 seasons you watched prior to the final season that you were on, you've still seen the majority of Survivor. And when I talk about Survivor in general, I'm typically referring to seasons 1 through 40 in just my like common conversations about the show. So I don't consider that lack of seeing all of 41 through 48 you being, out of your depth here.
Oh, sure. I just, whenever as to go back to the start, whenever I think about, oh, like what are the kids on Reddit going to say about whatever stupid opinions I have on Survivor, I think it does bring up a little self consciousness. So I think that's probably where
Interesting.
that came from. Yeah.
I'm wondering, as someone who follows Drop Your Buffs, because we really take a different tone in our approach to the show and the fandom, specifically the fact I think because we are an LGBTQ plus podcast and we really
Wait, you're
try.
gay?
It's true. Well, I
Wow.
guess, rather, this is my coming out. So thank you. Yes, I am gay. But as such, we really try and not only center the queer people on the show, but also we really try and uplift the women on the show, particularly in those early days of the show. People that, you mentioned like Parvati as a villain, for instance, which I agree with your argument here. But there are certain women on the show that over time have been uplifted to legend status that at the time weren't seen as such. For instance, we recently had Cass on the podcast just last week, and she talked about the death threats that she was receiving when Kagayan first aired, and how the conversation has shifted into icon, legend, mother. I'm wondering if we could apply that same mindset to you between your time on your 2 seasons of Survivor and now. Have you noticed a shift in how the fandom talks about and thinks about your time on the show?
Well, I haven't searched my name on Reddit in a very long time. And again, I'm not like super tapped into it. I feel like if people reach out to me, it's generally to say that, the way that I handled the outing has meant something to them. But I don't get any DMs being like, "Oh, sick move! You made him draw rocks, bro." But what I will say is, there's part of me that is so jealous of like queer Survivor fandom now, because that didn't really exist when I was at the height of my being a fan. Um, it was all hyper strategy nerds, like people who spent their time playing chess online and then talking about Survivor. Whereas now, like there's, the High Tops in Silver Lake, which is a gay bar in Los Angeles, watches Survivor, like has Survivor viewing parties. There was a Survivor drag competition in Austin, and there is this, I think, kind of fun, maybe campier fandom that is not so obsessed with like who is making the right moves, but more like who is fun to watch on TV.
Right.
That I think maybe would have celebrated me more. And I wish was around again, that I got to be a fan during that time. But I think that's probably where I feel like every homosexual started watching Survivor during the pandemic and like then became raging Survivor super fans because in New York, none of my gays watch Survivor, maybe one. In LA, everyone watches Survivor.
Mm.
All the gays watch Survivor. So, yeah, I think that's probably the different composition, and that's obviously the audience of this podcast.
Yeah, it's interesting. I watched the first two seasons of Survivor when they aired, dipped out before Africa, and then I'm one of the people that you mentioned. I discovered it during COVID, mainline through it all. So I would fall into that category of like, I'm now a super fan, but I am not card carrying because I'm new here, ostensibly.
Sure. I think there's also the Las Culturistas effect.
Yes.
Because as someone who was very close with Matt and Bowen and on a gay improv team with them during my time in New York, they definitely were not watching Survivor then. And it wasn't until like a few years after I was on Survivor that they started to like talk about it all the time, which I think spurred a lot of other people to talk about it. And then I texted him, I was like, you had Parvati on your podcast before you had me on your podcast? Are you bitches fucking kidding me?
That's incredible. You mentioned the fact that, you receive these DMs from people and they're talking about, I admire the way that you handled this situation. I'm wondering if there's ever any, I wouldn't use the word frustration per se, but this feeling of, gosh, I wish more people recognized the other things that I did on the show outside of that, which isn't to say I don't appreciate DMs like that, but I feel like you were like, as you mentioned, the rock draw, like you have these huge game moves that I don't know if are celebrated as much as they could be. And I'm wondering if that is something that, yeah, frustrates you or if you feel any type of way about it.
Well, see, this is one of the other reasons why stepping away from Survivor was so good for me is that like me immediately or me like as the show was airing not feeling appreciated for being a good game player, which regardless of whether or not I wanted to be recognized as such, and when I was not, it was very upsetting. um you know, stepping away from Survivor, I could give a shit if people think how if I'm a good game player or I'm recognized for my moves. For me now, continuing to work with GLAAD and being very concerned about trans representation and queer representation as a whole. Now, I'm very happy that that moment still resonates with people. And honestly, if you were to try to ask me about one of those votes that I felt so proud of 8 years ago, I couldn't tell you anything
Fair.
about it. But what I can tell you is that, so many trans kids were able to have conversations with their parents about being trans because they watched Survivor together. And parents were able to understand their kids because they got to watch me be on Survivor for a whole season and a half, just like running around being a goofy guy before they knew I was trans. And it allowed them to see trans people as whole persons and not just trans people. And I know when I was trying to figure out who I was and transition, that the lack of good media representation played a large part in my low self-esteem and my difficulty explaining myself to other people because trans people just didn't exist in the zeitgeist. So, now that that has become sort of my place of advocacy within the community, I am very proud that people continue to see that and to feel something and to have it change their understanding of who trans men are.
Yeah, and I do just want to shout out the documentary that you participated in, Disclosure, because it does a really good job of tracking trans representation in the media and showing that even the minimal amount that there was at a time, and we're talking decades before your time on Survivor, those rare depictions often shoehorned trans narratives into the story, or when they did, they depicted trans people solely as sex workers or as some sort of reveal of some kind. They were sort
Or
of
as like villains
tokenized.
and serial killers, like as
Exactly.
deranged.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think the documentary does such a good job of when you see the amount of instances of it, you're like, wow, you really start to thread the needle on this, on what people were being fed, the lie that they were being fed about trans people. So I can't encourage people to watch that enough. It's on Netflix.
Yeah.
But so okay, so I'm wondering about your relationship coming off the show after Game Changers with production and the show. You mentioned the fact that you were on a texting basis with the hosts. They're coming over to your house. You're making fried chicken. And Zeke, what is it about your fried chicken? Is it just like this is like what you excel at in the kitchen?
Yeah, so it's really good fried chicken. And it is They're actually technically chicken tenders because it's boneless, skinless chicken
Mm,
breast that is brined, according to a recipe from Thomas Keller, who's
okay.
like arguably the top chef in the United States. He's Per Se and the French Laundry, um, and then I am not a chef in the sense that I'm great at creating new dishes, but I'm a very good technical cook. So if you give me a very complex recipe, I can really execute it. Yeah, I remember having fried chicken with Matt Van Wagenen and Joe, who is one of the Matt Van Wagenen is the co-EP, and then Joe Leah is one of the story producers who tends to handle the nerds out there on the beach, who you like give your interviews with and talk to. Um, and I remember eating fried chicken with them. And oh, this is actually interesting. We were watching Survivor. We were watching 35, I think, and sort of the question came up of Jeff's retirement and what, because also at the time the pandemic saved Survivor. Um I feel like there is a world where Survivor ends at like 45 if it doesn't get that huge bump from the pandemic, because 39 was such a tragic season and really a lot of people had a bad taste in their mouth, and the feeling was like, well, I'm going to watch 40 and then I'm done. But then you had this year palate cleanser and this new surge of fans, and it has really kind of taken off again. But anyway, so we're having this conversation, and it was like, well, if Jeff should ever leave the show, it would probably mean the end of the show on CBS. But to we have this plan, and we've had like kind of like polite talks with USA, where we could reboot Survivor, but it would be this like cheaper, pared down, much leaner version of Survivor. But it would still be the challenges and the islands and yada yada yada. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. There is like a low budget version of Survivor they feel like they could pull out, which I feel like is what they did. Like watching the little bit I have of the 26-day Survivor, it feels like, yes, you're getting to watch the game, but we've lost the epicness of Survivor. The marooning and helicopter reward challenges and going to incredible places across the world, and it just feels so tight. It does feel like kind of a basic cable version of Survivor.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention the cinematography, the sound design, so many essential things that I think really lured people into the show in the beginning was
Yeah,
how it looked and how it was shot. And to your point, I feel like it's become a little templatized. And also just, we talk about this. Sean has a term that he uses, which is he calls it the Ellen audientification of Survivor, which
sure.
is to say it's all like bright colors now. There's the wardrobe is very wardrobey. Everything is very high gloss. It's very colorful. The
They gave me
challenges
such shit
themselves.
for
Yeah.
wanting to wear my stupid shirts on the show, and now everyone wears the fucking stupid shirts on the show.
Hmm. So, your tone right now is really striking, right? Because I remember I was at Mike.com. Was it 2016 when you left Game Changers? Do I have
16 was 33, 17 was 34.
Okay, excuse me. So it's 2017, and you were, to my memory, correct me if I'm wrong here, rather complimentary about the way in which you were treated by production, and you talked about there was this. I felt like it was presented as like a teachable moment when you were speaking in the press. Can you talk about where you're at now, where, as you said at the top of this podcast, you're willing to disparage the show because you recognize that it would cost you the relationship, but you were okay with that? When did that shift happen for you?
Well, I do want to say, I remain complimentary of the way that I was treated by Jeff Probst. He really did stick up for me. You know, there, right. I mean, like, you can get into the nitty gritty of like, did they know that the outing was going to happen? Like, yeah, of course they knew the outing was going to happen. Did they continue to lie to me about that for a while? Yeah, sure they did. But it was something I was willing to swallow at the time in order to accomplish like the larger goal. I mean, I think for me, as far as I was treated, my biggest complaint actually has to do with with the 11 days I remained on the island after I was outed and was in the midst of my second consecutive season and was spiraling out. I was not like, I have not been in that a dark a place mental health wise since I was like since like I was in that place in college and had to leave school for a while. I think that's my big thing is like I was struggling so hard. All of my allies were turning on me. I felt like just out of control and like I had to keep running around and trying to make moves, but no one was listening to me. Like, and I had been out there on the beach with those producers for like almost 60 days at that point. Like, there was a marked difference in my behavior and my mental health, and that no one reached out a hand and helped. That like took a moment to be like, "Hey Zeke, can we like check in? Like, you don't seem like you're doing well." But instead, when I would get pulled for interviews, they would they were mean to me. They were like, "Well, like not doing as well is you seem like you're slowing down, doesn't seem like you're trying very hard. Really, when the shit hits the fan, like you really can't rise up to the challenge." Like they were they were like blaming me for what had happened. Because I was like playing poorly and that's why Varner did it. And so I think they were trying to motivate me to keep going, but they were saying all of the things that were just sending me further spiraling. Um, and there was just I think that's part of my frustration too sometimes is that they're well fed and well slept and they have a bird's eye view of what's happening. They're seeing everything, they're listening to everything. And so when people are struggling out there, there's no need to let people struggle sometimes as much as they are, right? And I think that's what Survivor gets wrong sometimes. I think like that's the Brandon Hance of it all. Like he just shouldn't have been out there. I think Aubrey, her third time, she shouldn't have been out there. I think they let that Caleb situation escalate where he almost died. There is even like a time in Second Chances where Tasha is drowning and they won't send in the safety divers until like she's swallowed enough water that they feel like it might actually be dangerous. So I do think there are times where ethically the producers could step in before things got worse. But they want to see you dangle and they want to see you suffer.
This is not me defending this at all, but I think what I imagine is the conundrum is if you go back to the Australian outback and you have Scoopin falling into the fire, there's that split-second decision where the camera guy could help or keep the camera up. They made the decision to keep the camera up and they won an Emmy as a result. And so I'm not saying in the moment you should be choosing Emmys over human lives, but I think that is like a critical moment in sort of showing that when the option was presented and the choice was made, that choice was rewarded. And I think that might be an ethos that was kept around for some time.
Totally. And there's a classic Mark Burnett quote, or I think Probst asked Burnett, like, if someone dies. Oh no, I think it's about Australia because they had to jump off that cliff. And I think Probst asked, like, well, if someone dies jumping off the cliff, what do we do? And Mark Burnett said, keep filming. Sure. And look, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who, is a participant, and not a television creator. And so this is my ethical complaint.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I
But anyways,
ask, yeah, well, sorry, but before I let you continue, though, is this an okay? I mean, I want to ask you because I want to be mindful about not overly mining a past trauma for you. And so I'm wondering in these situations, like right now, but in general, when you're asked about your time on this show, I mean, it's as you mentioned, there's a lot of trauma here. Trauma, it sounds like from what you've said, that you've worked through. But as someone that hasn't experienced that trauma, I wonder what it's like being in a situation where you're like a public figure who goes on a podcast and is asked questions that might be directly about the trauma, tangential too. I'm wondering what that does for you and how about your comfort level in that.
See, I'm fine now, but there was a point where I didn't say yes to any podcasts because I remember I went on Elliot Glazer's podcast, and who I knew from doing comedy in New York. And it's just sort of like a comedy pop culture podcast. And he asked, and do you want to come do the podcast? And I was like, oh yeah, sure. I can talk about like whatever's on the Housewives. And then was we were putting on our headphones. I went to the studio. We were putting on our headphones to do the podcast. And he goes, "Oh, we're just going to talk about Survivor." And it was a full rehash of everything, of all the trauma and all. And I hadn't fully dealt with it, and I felt so trapped. Like I couldn't. Like I didn't feel like I had the agency to say, "I don't want to talk about this." Like I felt like I was trapped, and I had to like spill all of my trauma and all of the hard things that I'd gone through um, to the world. And that was like the second or third time I'd been on a podcast and topics had come up that I didn't want to talk about, but I felt I had to. So, and it's really my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. Uh, he has a publicist. He has a wonderful publicist. That's his personal publicist. And he told me something which had just never occurred to me, which is, oh, you can tell people ahead of time what your limits are. Like if you are doing an entertainment, interview, you can just say, I'm not talking about this, I'm not talking about this, I'm not talking about this. And if you don't want to say it to them, then my publicist can say it to them. Mm-hmm. And the way entertainment journalism works is they listen, because if they don't, then they don't get the interview, which is sort of different from journalism as a whole. It's sort of the same way that, after the outing aired, the big question was like, why did you give them permission to air it? Why didn't you ask them not to air it? And I'm like, you don't understand that like million-page contract we signed where we like give them indemnity for any of the 9 million ways they list that we could die. And also like you agree that they get to use everything and they get to make of it what they will. I mean, that the idea that I would have any agency to say, I don't want this to air, that doesn't exist. And that conversation was never had. I mean, we worked so hard to make it something that could have a positive impact on the world, and it did. And I am very proud of it, and was very proud of it at the time. And so when people were asking the question, like, did you give permission to air it? I was like, fuck you. That's not the question you should be asking.
Right.
I'm going to give you the answer, which just makes this go away, so we can focus on sort of the way that I have tried to direct this narrative.
Yeah, I just want to recognize in this moment, like that's a lot of work that you have to do, not just in the interview itself, but all the preparatory work you have to do going into the interview, recognizing your boundaries, being able to assert your boundary, whether it be before the interview happens, during the interview, totally take it on with an appreciation for the experience, but also create a potential, feeling like you're representing, especially young trans folks out there, to help them feel safe.
That's the thing too, is like, you can't just tell the story. You can't tell the story in a way that doesn't hit the important beats, or in a way that like throws something away, because every time you tell the story, you have the chance to move the needle with regards to people's understanding of trans people. And clearly we see how trans people have been weaponized by right-wing media over the past few years, and how that's had a major effect on the political, conversation in this country as a whole, not to mention the lives of trans people. Mm-hmm. So it's something that is just so much bigger than myself, and like bigger than, oh, I got asked to do my friend's podcast at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday in Burbank, and like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to mind this trauma, and I'm not gonna like sleep tonight because I'm gonna be so worked up about it. And then also there was a long time where whenever I talked about Survivor, I had Survivor nightmares, like night terrors, to the point where I had to be medicated for them because they wouldn't go away.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So I can understand the myriad reasons why you might not want to return to the show, but I could also see there being a lot of reasons why you would want to go back on the show, particularly because
really,
I really can, because we've been talking about Survivor 50, but just returning player seasons in general, and how there are certain players on the show who have more story to tell and those that don't. And so that's why there are certain omissions from 50 that feel particularly difficult, because it's like, wait, that story hasn't completed its arc. Whereas, like, for instance, I'll use Jerry Manthey as the example. We obviously want to see...
Please.
We want to see Jerry back, but I will say I do think she got the completion of her arc on Heroes versus Villains in actually making it just about to the end and having a huge redemptive season in terms of audience perception. This is not to say I wouldn't want her on a future season, by the way, but I'm just saying her story feels like three acts. Your story is such where I feel like there's more story to tell on your in your survivor journey. Like I said, I can understand why you wouldn't be clamoring, but is there any part of you that would ever consider, I'm not talking about for 50, I'm not talking about next year, but down the line, or is it fully off the table?
Well, here's what is important for everyone to understand is that Survivor is Probst and Probst is Survivor. There is no Survivor. Like Survivor, the idea that Survivor exists as an entity independent of Jeff Probst is a fallacy that people have because they have their own relationship with the show and they want to believe that Survivor is whatever it is to them. It's this great game, it's this great adventure, it's this tremendous personal experience, whatever it is, but it's not, it's Jeff. And my relationship with Jeff has been severed. And as such, I would never entrust my story to him ever again. Um, he doesn't deserve it. I don't want to give it to him as a writer. My story is mine to tell in whatever medium I should choose, and I don't need Survivor. Like at the time of my life, I needed Survivor to get to the next point in my life, and it got me there. And now I don't need it anymore. You know, Survivor is really difficult, and in order to get through it, you have to love it. I don't love it anymore. So I appreciate that you think that there's more of my Survivor story to tell, but I'm having so much more fun in my life living the rest of my story. And you know, that's speaking of the 50 cast, what's so interesting to me is that Colby got asked back because Colby like lived in Jeff Probst's house for a long time. I think after either All Stars or the Australian Outback, and they were the best of buds. And then they had a falling out and didn't speak for years. Like, and I think that's part of what Colby's shitty edit in Heroes versus Villains was about, is because that falling out happened either before or during the editing or somehow. And Probst was like, yeah, you think Survivor is more than me? I'm gonna make you look like an asshole. I'm gonna make you look weak. I'm gonna make you look lazy. And I am so surprised that Colby agreed to go back. But maybe Colby is just desperate to be on television again. So I don't know.
I mean, I think the currency of being on television is so seductive to so many people that they're willing to let past bygones be bygones. Or I think perhaps in Colby's mind, to your point about that edit his last time out, it probably can only go up from here for him in terms of his Survivor journey. Now, you mentioned, okay, so no to Survivor, but there are a lot of people out there, myself among them, that are clamoring to have you back in the reality competition space because I think it's both where you excel as a television presence, but also, as you were saying early on, like you have that competitive strategic mind. You mentioned the Traitors earlier. You said you were watching the Traitors. Has that thought pattern ever crossed your desk?
Sure. I don't think they would ever call. But if they
But
did,
can I just say, it's like, why would they call like Stephanie LaGrossa? That's pretty random. I don't think it's out of
well,
this, like, out of things that out of their minds that someone like you would be in consideration.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. Would I do it? Yes. And here's why. When I was 12 years old, I saw Cabaret on Broadway with Alan Cumming as the MC, and that is the night of my sexual awakening. Him walking around with those suspenders and red glitter nipples did something. And I was like, whoa. And I've been in love with him ever since. So for me, playing the game, whatever. I just want to hang out with Alan in a castle and see what he's wearing.
Totally. You're like, fuck
And
the game. I'm just here for Alan.
yeah, and I think it would be fun if I knew, you know, if I had a couple of people to like run around and do damage with. So if I had some buddies that I could work with and we could just go and be goofballs. But I'm telling you, like, if I went on Traitors, a lot of the stuff I would want to do would just be about having fun. Like I would get a bodysuit made that matched the book patterns in the library, so I could
Amazing.
like go and like be camouflaged against the wall as the books, and I would be crawling around, and I would be like putting whoopee cushions in people's seats. Like it would be to do dumb shit like that, and not like be like the greatest trader rooter outer faithful of all time.
But I think that's such a necessary flavor on a show like that. So I look forward to the day we get to see Camouflage Zeke. Two last questions before I let you go. Who from the Survivorverse are you still in contact with?
Sure. So Hannah and I hang out about we have like a pretty good schedule of hanging out every 6 weeks. And she's been really helpful. We got a puppy and she is like all about dog training. So she has been very helpful with our puppy. Brett, my good old gay buddy Brett.
Love
Um,
Brett.
yeah, we go in Provincetown to hang out with him. So we see each other, I'd say 2 or 3 times a year. And like Brett came to my bachelor party and was a big hit. Um, and then who else from Survivorverse? Aubrey, I keep in touch with. I talked to her a little bit before she went out, and that's about it.
Fair.
Yeah.
Why do you think when we told people a while back that we were like in conversation with you and that it seemed like it was going to happen, our audience freaked out? And so I'm wondering if you were to take yourself outside of being Zeke, why do you think our podcast, why is it that you evoke such a strong response from our listeners? Why do you think not, I'm not asking this as, you Zeke, step outside of your body for a second. Why are our fans so excited to have you on this podcast?
Probably because they're hoping to get to see a glimpse of my husband because he's actually famous.
No, I think you guys are a power couple, it's called.
Yeah, I mean, we that's what LA Magazine called us.
There you
We're
go.
their pride power couples of Los Angeles. Really, I I don't know because that's not really the response I got when it was happening. People were sort of like, yeah, whatever. I like someone else so much better, or he's so cringe, or he's so extra. Um, I mean, maybe it's just the novelty that I'm not around very often.
I think that contributes to it, but I don't think that's what it is. If I were to say, I think it's that you hit that sweet spot for drop your buffs in the sense that you are a past contestant who's both intelligent but has a sense of humor and has a real perspective on both the game but the psychological experiment that the game is. And I think you're able to talk about that and articulate that in an interesting way. Surely there's the novelty of the fact that you're not overexposed, but I think people are eager to just hear from you and not just about your experience on the show, but your thoughts, even like what you shared with us about like why you wouldn't want to go back. It's questions like that that I think people are super eager to learn more about. So with that, before I let you go, is there anything relevant to Survivor that I didn't ask you about that you would want to touch on, or yeah, a topic that I just didn't get around to?
Oh well, I was kind of hoping we were going to get to digest the 50 cast, but I think
Do you have a few minutes?
sure.
Okay,
Um,
I'd love your thoughts.
well, it's so interesting to me because I think all of the returning players make sense in a vacuum if you were to look at them individually about why they're being brought back. Um, but like as a whole, it's just such a disappointing group of people. And I think Survivor would have done itself so many favors if it just would have had a returning player season focused on players from the late 30s and 40s in around like Survivor 46,
Hmm.
to sort of like let the release valve off so there wasn't all this pressure to bring back all these people from I don't know any of these people from the 40s. Um and I also like from the little like jibber jabbering, I do online with the queer contestants, like Yam Yam didn't get called, Teeny didn't get called, Evie didn't get called. And I'm like, how are these like monumental queer players who were beloved and did so well? And how were none of them even in the like call of 200 people? That's bizarre to me. But mostly, frankly, I'm more into watching all of the players who didn't get to go meltdown online.
Yeah, that's been something to witness for certain. Can I run through the 10 players from the old school era and just get a one word reaction from you?
Sure.
I would love to know your thoughts on Jenna Lewis,
Who?
Colby Donaldson,
Superman in a fat suit. Isn't that what James called them on Heroes versus Villains?
Yes. Yes. Okay. Stephanie LaGrossa.
Maga.
I was gonna say the same thing. We're so aligned. Suri.
Regal.
Ozzy.
Hunk. I love Ozzy. I had so
Me
much fun playing Survivor with
too.
Ozzy. And I think people who like Ozzy's just so old school Survivor in the best way of like, let's go watch him fish. Let's go watch him climb a tree. Let's go watch him build a shelter. And I know that that's so passe for the people who are like, real Survivor fans, but there is something so magical about that Survivor stuff, that
Yeah.
classic Survivor stuff.
Something that Ozzy told me about Game Changers, and I'm curious if he told you this or you learned about this after the fact, that was when he arrived on the island. I think there had been a storm right before you guys had come. Maybe it's the same storm that happened during your previous season, but he said that
Well,
all the coconuts had been knocked off the trees as a result. And so when he arrived for Game Changers, he felt completely out of his element because the one thing he was like, this is what I contribute to the show, he couldn't do on that season. And I think he told me that that really threw him off for the rest of that game.
so I played the whole game with Ozzy. Every day he was there, I was there. And I will say for a lot of the coconuts, they're like cold green coconuts from like Thailand or whatever that they go and like sprinkle around your camp.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also like sprinkle bamboo around your camp because it's not necessarily like naturally occurring. So that's just sort of like populates itself. Um, and the first island that I was on with Ozzy, there were no coconut trees. Like it was some rocky island that didn't have palm trees on it. Um, so there were no coconuts to go climb and find. But like Ozzy kept himself very busy. He was always fishing. He was very like dictatorial about the shelter, especially when we swap. It was when they were doing the thing of like we start at 2 and we swap to 3, and one team has to go like start from nothing. And Ozzy was like, I'm gonna go swim and catch fish all day, and like would give us tasks about how we have to do the shelter, and everything had to be like perfectly gridded, and we're just like so bored. And I remember there was one point where we were just done with it. Like he wanted to weave the palm fronds in a certain way to make the roof, and we all just like threw the palm fronds on the roof and in just like a big stack, and he was like very offended by it.
I love that.
Um, but Ozzy, he's good at everything. It's great to have him. Great to have him on your tribe because we basically won all. We won all of the challenges. We only had to go to tribal twice in the pre-merge. And one was to vote out Sandra, and one was my special day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say notable bisexual representation for season 50 on a season when our only two LGBTQ plus players are Ozzy and Mike White.
Yeah, isn't that something? Ain't that something?
Continuing on our one name affiliation, Coach.
Dragon Slayer. I love Coach. I Coach might be problematic in the political sphere, right? But like my interactions with him, which I have been minimal but always fantastic. Coach always delivers being Coach. Like I remember sitting in a crowded like pie restaurant in Los Angeles 6 years ago and having him tell me the story of how he was captured from his canoe by a tribe in the Amazon that was looking at his butthole and trying to figure out how to chop him up and like boil him in a pot and eat him, and he delivers it with like a passion and an authenticity, but also sort of like a wink and a nudge. And it's a delight to have it. We are lucky to have Coach back on our television screen.
I don't disagree with you. I think my one qualm is that I wish his journey were Tocantins, South Pacific, Survivor 50. I feel like because I don't love the idea of a four-time returning player, which I know there are plenty of those on this season, but I just feel like that's the one. It's like I think he got a lot of maybe too much exposure in a small amount of time. But I think that was something that happened quite a bit.
Yeah, but we
That
haven't seen
juncture of
him
the
in
game.
like 10 years.
Exactly.
It's been a minute.
Yes, that definitely intrigues me. Okay, another player returning for the fourth time, Aubrey.
My love. I adore Aubrey. Aubrey, it's very interesting to me. So Aubrey and I basically moved to LA at the same time after Game Changers, and we'd had a very similar experience of like the last 2 years of my life has just been consumed with being on reality television, and I'm broken for it. Um, and we did a lot of like stuff to heal together. Like we would go to this spa where you could get in these heated like sleeping bags, like heated sauna bags, and you just go and you sweat for an hour. And we did sound baths and Joshua Tree and like bought crystals and did all sorts of stuff. But before, like, I think Aubrey was really taking that healing journey seriously. Um, she was struggling, and I hadn't heard from her for a while. And I knew from Dave, who I was close with at the time, that he was going back to do whatever season they did after Game Changers. Um, and I hadn't heard from Aubrey, and I woke up and I was like, oh, and surely Aubrey didn't go and play Survivor again and not tell me. Because like Aubrey lived in my house for like 3 months. She wasn't at the time, but I was like, surely Aubrey didn't agree to go do this again. Like so I had to like call Josh Wigler, who I knew was out in Fiji with the press team, and was like, look, Josh, I'm not to blow up your spot or anything, but either Aubrey is in Fiji or I need to do a wellness check on Aubrey. Just tell me which one. And he was like, ugh. So
You might still have needed to do the wellness check despite her being there.
I very much did. And if I could have flown out there and like been like, you are coming home with me, Mrs.
Immediately.
Yeah. But yeah, she's doing great. She's such a wonderful person. She's a mom now. And now that she's a mom, she's a whole new Survivor character. So it'll be interesting to see what Mom Aubrey Survivor player looks like.
Certainly. Chrissy.
I didn't watch 35.
Can't blame you. Christian.
I love Christian. I love players who have so much other life to live outside of Survivor. Like he's a fucking robotics professor.
Yeah.
And he doesn't need Survivor. He just gets to go and like have fun and do this thing.
Yes.
So I'm very excited to see Christian 2.0.
Angelina.
She's a strong woman. I don't know her too well. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what her relationship with Probst is like, because she challenged him so much about his treatment of women that that got sort of like reified later in 39. And so I think there is some part of him that's like, well, I'm having Angelina back because I can handle it. I can handle the criticism. So it'll be interesting to see if he wants revenge or if he's trying to prove to her that he's changed.
Mike White.
So interesting fact. Back when I was with Probst all the time, he was like, hey, you want to go get dinner at Craig's, which is this like restaurant in LA that all the celebrities eat at. And you can't eat out there unless you're a celebrity. It's like it's a safe space for celebrities. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And he's like, we show up and he's like, oh yeah, we're having dinner with Mike White and Dave Bernard. So Dave Bernard is Mike White's producing partner. He also happened to be the EP of Superstore, but this is before I met Nico. So it was, and what I didn't know is we were basically there to have dinner so I could convince Mike White to play Survivor.
Can I tell you, I've heard about this dinner from Dave Burnett. So it's funny connecting. I didn't realize that was the story you were going to tell, but yeah, what a small world. Okay, and Rick Devens.
I don't know her.
You don't need to.
I know he tried so hard to like befriend me after we got off Survivor. Like for like a year, like everything I posted, he like posted something back. Like he was like very thirsty to become friends with me. And I'm just like, no, ma'am, I'm not. You don't need to be pre-gaming with me. I'm not doing it again.
Well, this is funny, Zeke, because so on Drop Your Buffs, we posted a grid of the Survivor 50 cast, and we were being a bit trollish, and we did not include Rick Devens' face. We cropped it so that his face was cut out of the image, and you ended up resharing our post, which I think was interpreted by people as you in turn shading Rick. But my impression was that you just didn't realize that we had done that.
I honestly, I was like, I didn't know that was Rick. That I was like, oh, this is some like stupid guy who wore an American flag bathing suit on. I didn't even know whose
Well,
picture it was.
yeah. All right, Zeke, thank you so much for your time. If you ever feel compelled to come back, we do rewatches of past seasons. If you ever want to come back and recap one of those with us, we're about to do a Thailand rewatch. If you ever want to come back on and recap Survivor 49 with us, The Traitors, and just like that, The White Lotus, or just shoot the shit, this is an open invitation for you to return whenever you so please.
All right. Well, I appreciate it.
How'd that
Had a
go
lot
for
of fun.
you?
This podcast,
Yeah,
it was fine. I feel like
underwhelming.
underwhelmed. I feel like I'm very like on my toes. I don't know why I feel so like I see. This is why I don't do Survivor podcasts. Is I always feel like I have to prove myself as someone who has interesting opinions about Survivor. So clearly, even though I thought I was over the trauma, clearly it still flicks the switch in me.
Yeah, but I felt like you were activated in an exciting way.
Well, as long as people don't mind hearing my weird voice. Um, yeah. Oh, I also want to do a quick shout out. So Teeny, the lovely new trans guy, in the Survivor trans guys who made the merge fraternity, which previously was just me, um, is a guy was profiled in them, and I got to do the interview, and we had a lovely conversation, and
Yes.
I'm so proud of him, and I think he's like such a superstar and is going to do so many wonderful things. And I would encourage you to go read our little conversation. And I also wanted to bring something to you, which I talked about in that interview, which is as Drag Race is now the pipeline for trans women, is Survivor the trans pipeline for trans guys now?
I would love to fully realize that thought pattern. I
You
think that's
know,
great. Yeah. We will link to that article when we share this. I'll put a link to the article itself. And also, I just want to, I know Teeny is a follower of Drop Your Buffs and a listener. Teeny, it's time you come on the podcast. We are ready. I think your NDA has lapsed at this point. So hopefully you can come on, which we wait a year. We don't like talking to the players while they're under contract because it means that there has to be a third party on the line.
yeah.
And so once they are free of the shackles, we welcome them into our villainous lair.
Well, that's great. And Teeny, if you're listening to this, I would also recommend that you do the podcast because he has an interest in like getting into pop culture journalism, and there's no one better than that you can talk to than Evan.
Wow, thanks. I don't mean this in an indulgent way, Zeke, but I'm just wondering, like, how did I cross your desk?
Well, I think way back when I was still on Twitter, and I think like this is like 8 years ago, you like DM me multiple times to try
I'm
to do
sure.
something. I don't know. And there was just it was a complicated time for me, and I just wasn't answering. And then you saw me at the GLAAD Awards, and we're like,
Mm-hmm.
Zeke,
Yeah, because I was so starstruck.
you have to acknowledge me.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, oh hi. And then
Who's this rando?
I was like, and then so I'm on the GLAAD board of directors, as I mentioned. And I think I was like shooting the shit with Rich. And he mentioned you. And I was like, oh, he's been trying to get me to do his podcast forever. And Rich was like, don't be a fucking asshole, do his podcast. So
Yeah.
you
Thank you,
can
Rich. Shout out to
Rich
Rich.
from GLAAD.
Okay, well, thank you again. I do just
Who
want to
says hi,
say,
by the way. I hung out with him on Saturday.
oh my God, hi, Rich. I'll send him a text after this. I do want to say though, in our closing moment, I really just have so much genuine admiration for you, for your time on this show, for all of the media that you did after the fact. I wasn't watching Survivor at the time, but was fully aware of you and your story because you transcended, just the Survivor verse and actually made an imprint on pop culture. I think you did so much for the LGBTQ plus community. You've been such a important representation in popular culture, and you've cemented that. And I really, really tip my hat to you and admire all the work you've done.
I so wish I could just fart into the microphone right now. But
Thanks.
since it's video, like I can't just do like a it has to like be like a real fart from my butt. But I
No,
don't
we could
have
edit
one.
it so that people wouldn't know. Yeah, that's the joy of podcasts. I told you it's an edited podcast. We'll edit that in.
All right, great. Fantastic.
All right, Zeke, thank you so much. I hope to continue the conversation at a later date, but we'll put a pin in it for now. Where can people find you? Do you want people to find you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good.
Again, like I do a lot of like advocacy stuff now.
You do.
So it's at Zeke Chief on Instagram. That is the only place I am. And also, and I'll send you a link too, if you are interested in donating to GLAAD and supporting our work right now, which is all about sort of combating the full court press of anti-LGBT media and rhetoric, which we are experiencing in the world. Like GLAAD is the one that fights this. We are the organization that does it, and we are way underfunded compared to the opposition. So
All right.
if you think trying to talk to communities of faith about LGBT people, if you think trying to put, get writers' rooms trained to write positive trans stories, if you think any of that is worthwhile, then you should donate to GLAAD, even if it's $1, but ideally it'll be $1 million. So I'm going to send a link, and I just can't stress enough how important our work is, how wonderful the people at GLAAD are, which I think Evan can also echo, and the impact that we can make when we have the funds to do it. So
absolutely. If you're not following Zeke, give him a follow. Assuming most of you are. Zeke, we're going to flood the comment section of your most recent Instagram post with an emoji of your choosing. What would you like that emoji to be?
Can it be the green squirt gun?
Sure can.
Like the water
Drop your
gun?
buffs. Listeners, you know what to do, and I know you like to do it. So let's give Zeke the love that we just recently gave to Nyanka. We couldn't give it to Cass because Cass is not on Instagram, but I feel like people were... Nyanka was so elated by the response that she got from this podcast. So I want to thank our listeners, and let's pass it forward to Zeke in this moment. Zeke, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your continued harassment.
Yeah, I will. I'll try and work on it moving forward, but I can't say it. Might continue.
I appreciate it. Right, it
right.
comes from a place of love. Thank you.
It does, exactly. Thank you for recognizing that. All right, have a good one.
You too.
Okay, bye.